joined today by four of our most fantastic members of the community, who I'm so grateful to have joining me today. So thanks to each of you for joining. We'll keep it nice and easy with really breezy introductions. Maybe just kind of pass the mic. I'll pick someone at random to go first. Just share your kind of name, where in the world you're based, and maybe what you're focused on working on right now. What's your day job? We'll keep it really brief. Then each of you just pick someone who hasn't gone next, because I know Zoom doesn't have everyone in the same locations on the screen. But we'll do quick introductions, and then we'll jump into our panel discussion. So thank you all for joining, and I'll have my friend Alejandra, if you wouldn't mind going first here, and then pass the mic to anyone of your choice here.
Of course. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Alejandro Figueroa. I am an associate DevOps engineer for ExtraCard, for Extra App. That is my day job. Currently, I'm concentrating on exposing our DORA metrics or increasing our observability for our company. And that's so far about it. If I'm going to throw in a fun fact, I social Latin dance. I got more, but I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Tom.
Thanks, Alejandro. My name's Tom Printy. I'm working for Zebra Technologies. I've been here about 2 years working, and I work on a team that serves all of the business units within Zebra, and we unify the development tools that teams are using. So you can imagine, as a size company like Zebra, M&As, everything that's happening, there's a lot of different people doing a lot of different stuff, and our job is to unify that experience. Where we came interested in DevLake is really exposing efficiencies or inefficiencies that teams may have. And so, as you can imagine, with different maturity levels of development that's happening, we want to kind of look and see that. The other thing we're looking for is, are the consultants that we're hiring and paying for, are they actually doing the work they say they're doing? Managers don't really have a way to look at that. One way to look at that is pure commits, but so we're looking to expose that as well. So that's what we're kind of looking for. All the other stuff that comes along, DORA metrics, that's all awesome. We'll get to there, but we want to solve these two little problems first. So that's kind of what we're looking for DevLake to do. And I'll pass it on to Armand, or is it Aman?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. By the way, you have the most awesome last name. That's great. So this is
the printers, doesn't it?
I know, it's it's such a coincidence. Yeah, mine. I'm Aman. I am a CTO of a small startup. Actually, I don't know if it still qualifies as a startup, if it's been running for 5-6 years now. But it's called Resonance, and our tagline is Amplifying Health. You can find more about us at amplifyinghealth.com. We make products that will help like a lot of the third world countries to, get, just like how DevLake is, helping, developers get a handle on the data inside development activities. We are trying to do the same thing for patient data. How does hospitals get a handle of, how, anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And yes, I'm also, if I can throw out a fun fact, just like Alejandro, I love doing, photography and videography on the side. So if any of you want to connect about that, I can talk hours and hours on end. I'll pass the mic to Massimo.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Massimo, and thank you for. So I'm Massimo. I'm based in Italy, so I'm quite different from you. So I am engineering manager of lastminute.com. Let's say I cover several roles in Last Minute during years, because I'm Last Minute since 2006. So I was a developer, team leader, then DevOps, SRE in automation team, and now I'm a DevOps engineering manager. So at the moment, I focus on let's say to some visibility on across our technology department about DORA metrics and about how the team is performing yeah, that's the goal at the moment. We are in a very early stage, as I said to Maxim in direct message. So, and yeah, I'm a father, so I have not too much time to I have 3 kids, so I had no time to do anything else except work.
Yeah, it's very impressive, and thank you, of course, for taking the time in your evening to join us here for this. I'm really grateful for it, Massimo. So I feel like, in a very fantastic, organic way, we mostly covered here one of the first questions I had, which is what brought you guys to something like DevLake? Like, what was it that kind of kicked off your search to find something to dive into this data and to answer these questions? So I think we can touch on that if we want to in the next question. But with that, let's move into the next one. I'm curious. All of you have such kind of interesting and different backgrounds, and I imagine throughout your careers have worked with data in varying ways, or seen people working with data in managing, engineering processes, whether at a high level or at an individual level. I'd be really curious to dive in a little bit to what you guys have seen, where you feel like maybe dev data can go wrong, if you've seen it misused in certain ways before, or if you've seen any particular cases of it done really well. But I would love to chat about that with all of you. What your experience has been like with data in engineering, where it goes well, where it goes wrong, and if we have any interesting examples to dive into. Amon, if you're comfortable with it, maybe I'll pass it to you to kick it off here.
Yes. So, I exactly like you said. So, Tom, actually, you sort of outlined a very common problem that everybody has, right? You have all these disparate team members. You really need to see an insight into, like, what's going on, and that's how that kicked off the search, and that's how I found DevLake. And that's actually how I found DORA, which I feel that's even a more important part of all this story. So, you have all of these common problems, right? You have bottlenecks where, some teams are taking too longer, then you can't release your stuff. You have productivity tracking, right? You need to make sure that people are actually doing what they say they are doing. You have other parallel goals like measuring software quality, right? Like, you need to figure out how do you rank, and then the agility, right? How fast can you move around? Like, can you make changes as fast as the organization needs it? So all of this stuff has like some common like thread around all of this. And I feel like DORA is one sort of framework that helps you get a handle on that. And I feel like it's not just the DevLake, it's also like you have to sort of now become like more aware of all of this. You not only have to do this, but you have to actually educate all the surrounding stakeholders in your team, in your other parts of your company, to make sure they're aware of all of these concepts. What does it mean to have good quality software? What does it mean, all of this stuff. So that's why I really, really like what you guys are doing at DevLake, what DORA is providing, like this framework to kind of get a handle on it. And I think the other sort of things I would highlight is being open source, right? Being part of the Apache, that's a key value for a lot of the people out there. So that was a huge attribute for us. I think one other huge, I like to say this because it does make me feel better inside too. Like, I posted an issue in the DevLake GitHub repository, and someone just looked at it and responded within 24 hours. That tells me that this is like a community I want to be working with. So that sort of kind of gives you an introduction of like how I got into this. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
No, you touched upon some interesting things there, Amon, relating to like dev data strategies and like doing it in the right way. Talking a little bit about DORA, right, where it provides a level of kind of structure that allows for you to kind of put together a smart strategy. And I think if there is one thing you mentioned that I would want to really emphasize to make sure anyone listening to this walks away from, it's like you do have to get all the stakeholders up to speed on it, because if people don't know what you're measuring and why, and they don't know what the goals are, even the best intentions can run in all kinds of different directions and drive an outcome that isn't going to be successful. And I think buried within that, something that echoes a great conversation we had with Nathan Harvey, who's one of the DORA leads at Google Cloud, is this idea that ultimately in that communication is good dev data, good data-driven approaches to things is more of a practice than a destination, as cheesy as that sounds, right? It's the picking up of these good habits and translating it into day-to-day action. So I think you opened up some great thoughts there, Amon. Thanks. And Tom, if you're okay with me calling on you.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it's important to remember garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you're feeding the system garbage, you're going to get garbage out. And one of the things that we've discovered is that maybe our practices in I'll call it Jira. Our practices in Jira may not be what we think they are, right? We think we're doing the right things in Jira, but when you analyze it against data and you join that data up with your repository data, you see, well, maybe that isn't really with the story that's going on. So hygiene of data is really important, and making sure that people are following a process that matches up to what the developers are actually doing. So there might be a disconnect between project management and developers. Why aren't they talking the same language? They think a bug is something different than a feature, and having all that agree, right? And so that's really important, and we've discovered some of that. And not the other thing I'll say is I've been around software development for a long time. Using the data to analyze or force work may not be what you're trying to do. So being careful with saying, oh, you're not making the, I'm going to call it, number of code line changes. No, we don't want to look at that, right? That we know that's a wrong metric. But management may not understand that. They want to see throughput, but you have to change what the definition of throughput is. If I'm building a large language model, the number of code lines I'm going to actually write are much smaller than if I'm just writing a web crawler or something like that. So we have to remember and scale that, and not. It's important to know that people are doing work, but we don't want to use that as a metric to judge how good a person is. That I'll put it that way, right? We don't want them to produce 0, but we don't care if they're producing 1,000. And so if the metric is I need to produce 1,000 code lines a day, well, I'm going to go write a robot that does that for me so that I can stay employed, right? So we have to, I think as part of a community, we have to really be careful about the metrics that we add on and report on, because those can be misused by somebody who doesn't understand the data.
Yes.
So, good data and right reporting. Those are the two things I'll tell everyone.
Yeah, if I can quickly respond, this is, that I totally agree, Tom. So, I've used in my past, I've used tools like, Git Analytics. There's a product called Git and Chill, and it gives you think of that heat map whenever you go to a GitHub profile, right? You see a heat map of that. It's basically just a zoomed in version of all that, right? Like, tell me, what did you do on this time? Or like, how are you spending your time? But again, they are just like a regurgitated version of the commit history, and not really, not something actionable or helpful. So the other way I look at it, as a person who always thinks of analogies, you can have the best MRI machine that tells you here's what's wrong with you, but you need a radiologist to actually interpret and give you actionable advice, right? So it's this framework that helps you do that, which is very, very valuable. So
I think that's really well said. A similar analogy I always like to think about is the idea, right, that I think a lot of people can get stressed about, oh, is this data suddenly going to replace the decision making or the important context and thoughts that I have as an experienced leader who has that context? The answer is no, right? It's that we're providing great telemetry, and I always like to think about it as like if you're a fantastic pilot, you need a great dashboard, you need great avionics, and you're not just going to fly according to wind speed or only according to elevation or only according to the angle of your wing flaps, right? You need all of that data to be an expert pilot and to deal with any challenges. So I love the way that you guys captured that there.
The other way to look at that is, as a leader, I've made a decision. So let's say that I've decided this quarter we're going to work on quality, right? So now you're going to start to see that spin on the quality metrics. You're going to see, okay, we're addressing, instead of doing new features, we've all of a sudden done bug fixing because we're going to address quality. So I could look at that and say, okay, my marching orders are being followed, versus reactionary and go, where, why is this and why is that? I can kind of say, okay, the troops are marching to my orders. And we actually saw that. We said in one of our products, we said, we're going to address quality. And you can actually see in the metrics, you can say, yep, they sure are. They're working on quality. The feature has gone down, but all the bug fixes are going way up. So you can kind of see that. And to see that and have a story as to why that's happening, then it's not a surprise. It's like, well, why are we spinning? Why are we doing so many bug fixes? Because we said we would. So having that and validating that you are doing what you say you are doing can be an important message as well.
Yeah, that's really well said. And two things I want to extract from what you just said there, Tom, which I think is so valuable, because to me it gets at the core of like, why do we even do this, right? And it's this idea that no one likes bad surprises, and this stuff can help you to get rid of bad surprises, or at least reduce the chance, and frequency of them. And I think the most important piece is we've all had that experience where we've had a week where we're just reacting. Like people are throwing things over at us through tickets, Slack messages, emails, whatever it is, and you're constantly in that reactive work state, and it's tiring and it's frustrating. And you compare that to what does a week look like when you're 100% in proactive mode, right? Where you start out the day knowing what you're tackling, and you have a clear flow, and going to work on items 2, 3, and 4 today, 5, 6, 7 on Thursday, and you can get in that flow state. And I always like to talk about that. That's ultimately one of the big values of picking up these practices, of course, is it allows for, whether you're an individual contributor or whether you're a manager or whether you're the CTO of a multinational company, it's empowering people with the information they're going to need to shift from reactive to proactive. And then I think that makes for a better life for everybody. I'd love to flow into the next question. And of course, Alejandro or Massimo, feel free to revisit our previous question here if you have anything you want to add. But the next one I'd like to dive into is, I think one of the challenges that we've all seen with data-driven approaches to engineering is there's a million metrics, right? You can go in all of the DevLake dashboards, of course, and find dozens of different dashboards for different use cases, and each of those has many metrics buried in it. I think that can be a bit overwhelming, especially for first timers, and it's part of why I'm personally so evangelical about DORA. And I think DORA is one piece that perhaps unites this whole panel here. I would love to hear from you guys. Like, what do you think the value of DORA and other frameworks like that ultimately is? And if you were kind of presenting DORA to a first timer who's never seen it before, like how would you personally kind of articulate the value of something like this?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, I think is let's say a standard. So everyone in the world know, maybe not all, a lot of people in the world know what is DORA in our let's say environment. So this is the first good thing, no? So having a common point of view, common interpretation of this data, that is not so easy because, like you said, there's tons of metrics, but you have to be good to interpret it. Let's say having a good interpretation of the data. Otherwise, you can go the, let's say, wrong way, and the complete disaster. So in the end, to be honest, I don't have a lot of let's say experience in data, because we are, let's say, at the beginning of this journey, this company. So, and the first things that we need to go is change our mindset to be, let's say, based our decision on not on the feeling, but on the data. So, and this is the why we are installed DevLake, why we are leveraging more and more on DORA metrics and so on. So, as I said, we are in very, very early stage. We need to test more this tool and also the metrics that this tool can give us. So, but just to give a feedback, I love the flexibility of the tool. I love all the data that this tool can gather, can collect, and can put together, because it's a very big value for us. And I for all the other guys that are using DevTools. So yeah, that's it. So I hope that I answered your question as best as possible.
No, you certainly did. And Alejandro, it looks like you have something to share, so I'll pass the mic here to you.
Thank you. So first, to address the first question, right? Let's take it a step back and not necessarily saying the data we're putting in, right? Because the data we're putting in is the data we define. So it depends what our definition of our metrics are. And that's different company by company. That's where you really can start to discern, okay, are these metrics accurate? Because are we inflating it to make ourselves feel a little bit better, right? We're human. We want to win sometimes. So maybe we'll twist a little something to make it sound like we're in a better spot than where we actually are. So the definition of the data we're putting in to get the metrics is very, very important, because what are we defining as a company for good deployment frequency? What are we defining as a company for change failure rate, right? We have our accelerated state of DevOps report that tells us the overall, but that's different if you try to compare a startup to Microsoft or Netflix or Google. Like, your metrics are going to be completely different.
For sure. There's two things buried in that I want to extract and share for everybody that I think is so important. The first is, right, and it touches on Tom's point, garbage in, garbage out. This idea that what you feed something like DevLake is going to have a very big impact in determining what you're going to get out, and certainly the quality of it. And I think part of what you touch upon there, Alejandro, is it's buried in things like, what does your issue labeling look like? What are the practices there? And if you're defining a whole bunch of nonsense as bugs because you're lazy, or maybe you're not, right? That's going to have a drastic influence on what that output ends up looking like. So it's important to be mindful of that, of course, and understand like how you're configuring the input, how you're configuring the metrics themselves. And that's certainly one thing that DevLake offers, of course, is you can go customize those metrics, and that can be used for good and for evil, right? Like you could customize those metrics in a way that's going to give you some pretty cruel and mean assessments, or some very, maybe too gentle and too positive and useless assessments. So you have to be careful. And the other thing you touched on, Alejandro, which I think is an important thing, is we'll have this natural inclination for comparison, right? And comparison is very helpful and very useful, but you also have to be so careful with that, especially in comparing, what are I'm a 70-person startup. Comparing ourselves to an organization like Microsoft probably doesn't make any sense in really any scenario. And you can extrapolate that all the way down to the team level even, right? Where you might have one team working with certain languages, frameworks, goals, different priorities. You can't necessarily compare them apples to apples with another team in the same company, even if they're exactly the same, right? You might be able to establish some baseline goals for the whole company, but you do want to always be careful to dive into that comparison. So I think those are really critical points that I'm glad you surfaced. Amon, I saw you smiling and nodding there.
Yeah. So actually, that issue labeling thing. So by the way, I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. So I actually used to work for St. Jude, if you've heard of that cancer hospital. And my CEO actually still has an appointment there, so he goes there to volunteer or help out as needed. He told me the story like, hey, Aman, like I saw like they put up these monitors, like dashboards in like one of the reception areas, and it was counting like the number of problems fixed. And I guess they had this project for converting from like one EMR system to the other. So then they labeled like almost 500 issues or something, and then they all got fixed with one small change, and it was showing like 500 and something issues fixed today or something. So he was kind of saying, hey, you can actually have snafus with metrics like that. So very good point, Alejandro. It does make a difference. And, this is all about communicating, right? So you have to make sure you send the right kind of message. And then the next day it'll be like, why didn't you, you didn't do anything. Only 2 issues fixed.
Like, they're crazy, right? Like, you
Yeah.
just kicked ass last week. And this week, man, we're tired.
Yeah.
So
very interesting.
What's also interesting to me, and I like what you said, Alejandro, we don't want to compare ourselves, but there are some cases where we do want to compare ourselves, right? And so what management is always asking is, are we on the right track, right? Not that we're doing anything wrong, but are we on the right track, and what's next? So having some kind of baseline to say a project of X size should be doing Y and Z is always helpful, right? As as a basic guideline, we say every sprint you should be fixing 5% of your bugs or something like that. That's kind of the right thing. If you break out of that norm, then you have to go look at what's wrong. But the problem is, even here at Zebra, we don't know what that right guideline is. And so it would be neat if DevLake shipped with some basic guidelines. Like, we think based on the number of projects that you have, your range should be falling into this zone. Mm-hmm. If you exceed that zone, flash me an alarm. I can go change that later, but out of the box, it might be having something good, because when you start to look at this, you don't know what you don't know. And so I don't have any trends to go on. I need some kind of guidance to or give me some guardrails, as I like to say. Give me some guardrails to look at, but let me change them later.
Yeah.
Correct. And that definitely helps when one is first trying to understand their own metrics, right? And that's also like company based. I was able to go in with a little understanding of what we wanted. But for someone that doesn't know anything, like, okay, well, what are our metrics? If DevLake were to ship us those goals as we log in and as we go ahead and connect our pipelines for data, it would definitely create that initial path, right? Okay, so this is where we are. We can then figure out if this is good or bad or how we want to adjust it. So I agree with you there. That is one thing that would be amazing and awesome for startups or for engineers who are just starting their journey in observability and learning metrics.
Yeah, I love that. I was literally taking notes on that, Tom. The idea that you just shared, I think, is a great one for the community to cook into some future releases here, is making that kind of out of the box guidelines experience even more kind of clear and even more actionable. And I've always felt personally that that's one of the core values of DORA, right? It just gives you a great place to start, because that's been one of my own learnings on my own journey with dev data, is realizing that even such advanced teams and such experienced people maybe aren't really up to speed on this. And even if they have a desire to move forward on it, that kind of blank canvas challenge of figuring out where do you begin can be one of the biggest hurdles to get over. And I think DORA perhaps solves for at least a big part of that. So I think that's a really interesting point, kind of establishing some of those guidelines to get started. It's a fantastic thought.
Sorry, Maxim, just one question, if I can. Do you think that makes sense of, let's say, a mix of DORA metrics and SLO, SLI, and SLA stuff in order to have better predictability on teams, on something like that? I wanted to say, I tried to ask you this stuff because it's something that is in my mind from the beginning, but I would like to have let's say, a discussion on that if you have some time.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to chat about it one-on-one, or we can even create a community huddle to chat on that one specifically. Very interesting too, Massimo, is specific to like SLO. Hejong is actually working on a talk right now for the SLO conference, which I believe is coming up 2 months from now. I think we'll share it on Slack so that you guys can dive in if you want to. We had a talk that got selected where we're actually going to be talking about using DevLake for SLOs, and part of that is going to be sharing our perspective, at least, on how DORA might interface with some of those common SLO frameworks. So it's very cool that you brought that up, because it really aligns with something that we hadn't even shared yet. So that's fantastic. So I know we're approaching time, so we could talk for hours, which is so awesome. But I do want to be respectful of everybody's calendars. So in the future, we'll have to do perhaps more of these panels, and consider Alejandro, Massimo, Amon, Tom, all of you are more than welcome, and very much invited to any of these future ones, because this has been such a great and stimulating discussion. I'm sure the recording is going to be really appreciated by the community too. So thank you. To bring us into a kind of clean close, I would love to perhaps go around and get maybe your kind of parting advice for an engineer who's maybe looking to dive into this stuff. If there's one mistake you would want them to avoid, or one thing to really get right that you think you wish you knew when you were getting started, I would love that thought. And feel free. It would be great if you have something specific to dev data and even DevLake. That's the hopeful goal here. But if you want to go more broad and just share a piece of advice for just being a great engineer and a great engineering manager or leader, feel free to go more broad as well. But would love to get your guys' kind of parting thoughts, parting advice. What would you want someone to know?
So I'll go ahead and start this one off. My journey as an engineer started very recently. I'm 2 years in. And if there's something that I could tell another person, is on a broad level, don't give up. Learning something is always hard, right? You're learning a new language, whether it be an actual language, English, Spanish, French, Italian, or we're talking about Python, JavaScript, YAML, JSON, just to throw out a couple. Don't give up. If you feel like you're starting to be discouraged, something that my instructor taught me was, if you ever have doubts about yourself and what you're doing, either you are the best actor in the world, or you have some type of idea what you're doing. And since, I'm not in the Grammys, I have to have some type of idea what I'm doing. So don't give up. In terms of DevLake, don't be afraid to try new things, right? Connect your projects, mess with the transformation, start really understanding what you're connecting and how to get the information that you want out. Like, don't just look at DevLake, look at what you have configured to be able to determine how to get the best data out of your projects into DevLake.
I love that advice. Yeah, I think that's something everyone should be thinking about when they dive into DevLake, of course, is feel free to get messy, right? Feel free to start adjusting things, figuring out how it's working and how to get what you want. I love that. And great advice to Alejandro on the determination and tenacity as you're leveling up your skills and diving into new things. I'll pass the mic to Amon next.
Yes. Yeah, so I'll echo what Alejandro, you said. I think just to kind of re-say it, so stay the course, right? Become a sponge, like make sure you're listening to everything, and like make sure you look at the leaders that you want to follow, and like try to absorb as much as you can. And then the same thing you said, but just in a different way. One way to confuse success, it might just be like a lot of hard work, right? They're the same thing, but sometimes it's not apparent, right? You don't know how it will pay off, but it'll eventually pay off. So hard work, I think, is the underlying driver. And then to bring it back to DevLake, I'll say that always think of it's the developer at the end of everything, right? We have the metrics, we have all of these tools, but really what we're doing is trying to grow developers and quality and all that good stuff. So always remember, like at the end of it, it's always people. So make sure you don't forget that. Yeah. I'll pass the mic to Tom. Yeah.
Thanks. So I'll quote our famous tech hero, Steve Jobs, stay curious. It really is important. The whole reason I'm exploring DevLake is because I was in a meeting and I overheard a conversation. And that's how I'm like, oh, this is something somebody wants and needs within the organization. I'm going to go figure out how to do it. It's not my primary job. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm taking the time, I'm making the space for it to go learn something new and explore something that somebody wants or needs. And so it's understanding that curiosity. It's listening to what people are saying and what they're doing, not necessarily what Jira is telling you to do every day, right? I got 1,000 things in Jira I could go look at, but I'm carving out a little space to go do something and go explore something. And that's where the magic happens. Because maybe I'll be the DevLake admin for all of Zebra in a year and a half. I don't know what's going to happen. It's a journey. It's going to change. And so stay curious. That's my advice.
I love that. And I'm a big fan of that speech you're referencing too. So great choice. Massimo, I'll pass the mic to you here.
Just two very quick stuff. So the first one is, I think, trusting your engineer. And the second one is trusting your data once you have to take a decision. That's it.
Yeah, in data we trust.